Imagine losing everything because of one simple choice. Manuel was just a petrol station attendant, an ordinary man, until the day he decided to help an elderly woman in distress. He didn't know it at the time, but that one action would change his life forever. Fired for his good deed, he suddenly found himself lost, until an unexpected knock at his door brought about a twist no one could have seen coming. What happened next will surprise you. The sun was blazing, and the line of cars at the petrol station didn't seem to end. Manuel had already served dozens of customers that day, but his mind was elsewhere. His sweaty, weary face reflected his reality, a man who'd worked at the same station for years, struggling to provide for his family. With each car he served, his thoughts turned to Clara and little Tom, his young son who suffered from respiratory problems. Money was always tight, and expenses were always high. The job was exhausting, but Manuel knew he couldn't stop. He had no other choice. There were bills to pay, doctors to see, and the distant hope of better days that never seemed to arrive. He remained polite and attentive to every customer, even though inside, he could feel his energy running out. He knew he couldn't let the fatigue take over, his family depended on him. Between customers, his mind wandered, desperately searching for a way out of the problems that seemed to grow by the day. But at that moment, Manuel had no idea that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. It was in the middle of this heavy, monotonous routine that Manuel saw her. An elderly woman with grey hair and a worried look approached, walking slowly as if carrying the weight of a difficult life. She made her way to the station with hesitant, labored steps, as if every movement took great effort. Manuel noticed her looking around, appearing confused and a bit lost. He approached her, not sure what to expect. "Are you all right, miss? Do you need some help?" Manuel's voice, though tired, remained kind. He sensed something was wrong, and the expression on the elderly woman's face only confirmed it. She took a deep breath before speaking. "My car's out of petrol, but I don't have any money to pay for it. I don't know what to do." Manuel glanced at her old car, parked a little way off. His heart sank. She looked so fragile, and he could tell she was in trouble. But at the same time, he thought about the strict rules at the station. He'd already been warned several times by his boss. If he helped this woman, he knew he could lose his job. And if he lost his job, how would he support his family? How would he pay for Tom treatments? The dilemma weighed heavily on him. His conscience was torn, but his instinct to help was stronger. He knew how much a simple act of kindness could mean to someone in a moment of despair, and this woman clearly needed help. Manuel took a deep breath. He was about to make a decision that would change everything. "Don't worry, I'll sort it out." He walked over to the pump and started filling up the elderly woman's tank. With every liter that flowed, he could feel the weight of the consequences closing in. But in that moment, the fear of being sacked wasn't as powerful as the need to help this woman. She thanked him, her eyes filled with tears, but Manuel, fully aware of the risk, simply said, "Take care." After the woman drove off, Manuel returned to his work, but the atmosphere had shifted. He could feel it in the air, something was about to happen. The fear of what was to come gnawed at him. He knew his boss wouldn't let it slide. The rules were clear, giving petrol without charging was a serious offense, and he was already on thin ice with the supervisor for minor mistakes. He knew this act of kindness might cost him dearly. Anxiety started to build within him, turning minutes into hours. Every customer that came was served on autopilot, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought of Clara, of Tom's smile, of the bills that needed paying at the end of the month. And then, the inevitable happened. The boss, a stern and rigid man, appeared at the petrol station. He walked towards Manuel with a serious expression, and Manuel felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that the moment he had been dreading had finally arrived. The boss stopped in front of him, holding the clipboard with the sales records. "Manuel, I need an explanation. I've been notified that you filled up a car without charging. Is this true?" Manuel's heart raced. He thought about lying, about trying to cover up the truth, but he knew that would only make things worse. He took a deep breath and answered firmly, even though he knew he was about to lose everything. "Yes, it's true. The lady didn't have any money and needed help." The boss stared at him for a few seconds in silence, but Manuel knew what was coming. "The rules are clear. You know we can't allow this." "I'm sorry, Manuel, but you're fired." Those words hit like a heavy blow. Manuel felt the ground collapse beneath his feet. He had lost his job. The only source of income for his family had vanished in an instant, all because of an act of kindness. His hands trembled, and he could barely process what had just happened. Without saying another word, Manuel removed his apron, gathered his few belongings, and left the station, head down. The fear was now real. How would he tell Clara? How would they manage the bills, the medicine for Thomas? As he walked home, it felt as though he was adrift in a sea of uncertainty. When Manuel arrived home, the weight of the world was on his shoulders. Clara was waiting at the table, and the silence that followed as he placed the keys on the counter said everything. Without words, he sat beside her, feeling her worried gaze. "I lost my job," he whispered, unable to meet her eyes. Clara didn't say anything for a moment, as if she too needed time to absorb the impact of those words. "But why, Manuel? What happened?" He explained about the elderly woman, how he knew he had to help her, even knowing the consequences. When he finished, Clara took his hands, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You did what you thought was right. And that's what matters." But Manuel knew that wouldn't be enough to pay the bills at the end of the month. The days ahead would be hard. Clara, always calm and understanding, held his hands and tried to comfort him. "You did the right thing. Sometimes, that's all we can do. We'll find a way," she said with a strength he didn't feel within himself. Deep down, though, Manuel knew the situation was dire. What would become of them? He had no other source of income, and the bills would keep coming. Clara's words soothed him, but the fear lingered. The silence of the house seemed to amplify his worries. Later, Clara suggested he start looking for something new. "There's always a way, Manuel. We'll find it." But he knew it wasn't that simple. That night, after Tom had gone to bed, the silence of the house seemed louder than ever. Manuel tossed and turned in bed, guilt and frustration keeping him awake. He thought about going back to the station and apologizing, trying to get his job back, but something inside him wouldn't let him. There was dignity in the choice he had made, but there was also pain. He felt lost, unsure of what he would do, how he would provide for his family, how he would pay the bills. He thought about calling family or friends, but couldn't settle his mind. The days dragged on. Manuel began searching for work, but nothing came up. Each morning brought a new worry: the bills, the rent, Tom's medicine. The tension was building, and he saw the fear in Clara's eyes, even though she tried to hide it. Even Tom seemed to sense something was different. "Daddy, why are you sad?" he asked one morning. Manuel forced a smile, trying to be strong for his son, but he felt a tightness in his chest. "Daddy's just tired," "Son, nothing's wrong." But Manuel knew things were far from all right. The sleepless nights continued. Sitting at the kitchen table, Manuel stared at the pile of bills, not knowing what to do. Then, on that cold, silent night, something broke through the emptiness. A firm, unexpected knock at the door. Manuel got up, feeling a little confused. He wasn't expecting anyone. Clara, too, looked at the door with surprise. He opened it slowly, and standing there was the elderly woman. But she wasn't alone. Next to her stood a tall, well-dressed man, with a serious yet kind expression. Manuel was speechless, his heart racing. What could this mean? "Sorry to bother you so late," said the lady softly. "But I had to thank you for what you did for me that day." The man beside her smiled and introduced himself. "I'm her son. Your kindness towards my mother did not go unnoticed, and I'd like to offer you something in return." Manuel didn't know what to say. The man then handed him an envelope, inside of which was enough money to cover their expenses for months. But more than that, he offered Manuel a position as a manager at one of the petrol stations in his chain. The opportunity that Manuel had never imagined was now right there before him, a reward for his act of kindness. Tears welled up in Manuel's eyes. The gesture that seemed to have cost him everything had actually brought something far greater. Sometimes, doing the right thing leads to unexpected rewards. Manuel held the envelope in his hands, still unable to believe what was happening. He looked at Clara, who was equally stunned, unable to hide the tears streaming down her face. The reality of that moment felt surreal. The fear he had carried since losing his job had turned into a wave of relief and gratitude. Everything was changing, in a way he never could have imagined. The elderly woman stepped forward, her eyes kind and teary. "You have no idea how much your help meant to me. I was going through a very tough time, and your kindness, it gave me the strength to carry on. I will never be able to thank you enough." Manuel felt a lump in his throat. Those words struck him in a way he couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just the money, or even the job offer. It was the recognition that, deep down, doing good, even when it seemed impossible, had brought something positive, something far beyond what he could have expected. He remembered the look in the woman's eyes that day, the desperation and gratitude mixed together. Now, he was seeing how that simple decision was echoing back in ways he'd never imagined. The elderly woman's son continued. "My mother means everything to me, and seeing someone willing to help her without asking for anything in return touched our hearts deeply. We couldn't let what you did go unnoticed, and we want to make sure you and your family never have to worry again." His words seemed to echo through the room. Manuel didn't know how to respond. He was so used to struggling, to facing hardship. The idea that, because of one act of kindness, his life could take a different turn caught him off guard. He looked at Clara, who squeezed his hand, both of them feeling the immense weight that had just been lifted off their shoulders. "I didn't do it expecting anything in return," Manuel said, his voice low but sincere. "I did it because I couldn't not help. It was all I knew how to do at that moment." The man smiled again, and the elderly woman nodded, as if she understood completely. "And that's exactly why you deserve so much more." The elderly woman said her goodbyes with one last look of gratitude, and her son shook Manuel's hand firmly before they left. When the door closed, the house was filled with silence for a few moments. But this time, it wasn't a heavy or anxious silence. It was the silence of a new opportunity, of a future unfolding before them. After the visitors left, Manuel and Clara remained seated at the table, still trying to absorb everything that had just happened. The envelope lay there, but now it represented much more than just a temporary financial solution. It was a symbol of a life-changing event, an unexpected twist, a gift from life in response to a difficult choice. Manuel looked at Clara and felt a surge of mixed emotions. He thought about the past few years, how each day had been a struggle to keep everything together, how he always questioned whether he was making the right decisions. There had been nights when he lay in bed, exhausted, wondering if the sacrifice was worth it, if his efforts would be enough to secure a better future for his family. Now, sitting there with Clara beside him, he realized that, even without knowing, he had always chosen the right path. Doing good, even when it seemed impossible, was what kept him going. It hadn't been easy, and it didn't always bring immediate rewards, but simply following his conscience, doing what he believed was right, had led him to moments like this. The future he had once imagined as full of uncertainties now seemed a bit clearer. "You've always been like this, Manuel," Clara said, as if reading his thoughts. "You've always followed your heart, and that's what makes you special. It's what makes you deserving of what's happening now." Manuel smiled at her, tears in his eyes. "I just did what anyone should do, Clara. But sometimes it feels so hard, you know? It feels like the world only rewards those who look out for themselves." Clara shook her head. "Maybe the world doesn't always give back in the way we expect. But today, you've seen that goodness always returns, one way or another. And you've earned every bit of this." Manuel held Clara's hands, and together they stayed there a while longer, savoring the moment. He knew that the challenges weren't over, that there was still much to be done. But for the first time in a long time, Manuel felt that the weight on his shoulders had lightened, and that the future, though uncertain, seemed more promising. In the days following that night, Manuel's life began to change in tangible ways. The job he had been offered not only brought financial stability but also a new sense of purpose. He was no longer just a petrol station attendant. As the manager of one of the stations in the network, he had more responsibilities, but also more control over his future. There was dignity in his new role, and for the first time in years, Manuel didn't feel invisible. Clara noticed the transformation in her husband too. He still had the same generous heart, the same desire to help others, but now there was something else, hope. Manuel no longer carried the weight of exhaustion or constant worry. He came home earlier, with the time and energy to play with Tom, whose smile brightened the house, despite the respiratory difficulties he still faced. The day Manuel started his new job was unlike any other. As he stepped into the station, he felt confident even though everything was new to him. There were challenges, of course, but he was ready. For the first time, Manuel felt like his life was back in his control, not just to support his family, but to do more. To be more. The employees, who once only knew him as the tired attendant, now looked at him with respect. He worked hard to be a fair leader, someone who remembered where he came from, who understood the struggles of those still in the position he had once been in. He helped when he could, always mindful of the choice he made with the elderly woman. A choice that had changed his life forever. A few weeks after starting his new job, Manuel received a letter. It was from the elderly woman he had helped. The message was simple but filled with deep meaning. "You didn't just change my day, Manuel. You changed my life. Because of your kindness, I regained faith in something greater, in people, in the future. I will never be able to repay what you did for me, but know that my heart will always be with you." Manuel held the letter in his hands for a few minutes, taking in every word. There was something profound in that thank you. He knew the woman would never need to repay him materially, but the knowledge that his small act had touched someone's life so deeply was the greatest reward he could ever receive. He carefully placed the letter in a special drawer, alongside other small mementos from his journey. The letter was concrete proof that even when the world seemed unjust, a simple act of kindness could have an immense impact. It wasn't about the money or the job that came later. It was about the value of doing what was right, of offering a hand when someone needed it most, without expecting anything in return. Manuel's life was never the same again. He, Clara, and Tom moved forward, now with the security and peace they had always sought. Manuel knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but he was ready. He had learned that kindness, even in its simplest forms, had the power to change the world around him, and he would never stop practicing it. Now, every time he looked at the faces of his wife and son, he felt something new inside him, the certainty that doing good, even in a world that doesn't always give back, was the only path worth taking. No matter how hard, exhausting, or painful it might be, he would continue down that road. Because, in the end, goodness always finds a way to come back. And so, Manuel, the man who lost everything because of a kind gesture, discovered that kindness always brings with it unexpected surprises, and sometimes, they are far greater than anyone could ever imagine. If this story touched you, remember, kindness always finds its way back. Thank you for sticking around until the end. Be sure to subscribe for more heartwarming stories that inspire. Like this video, share it with someone, and join us on this journey of compassion and change. And if you enjoyed this video, click on the video that just appeared.